We're very excited today to have a guest speaker. We have Daniel Di Martino, speaking with us today. He is a PhD candidate in economics at Columbia University and the founder of the Dissident Project. Born and raised in Venezuela, Di Martino experienced the terrible consequences of socialism firsthand. After leaving Venezuela for the United States in 2016, he dedicated himself to explaining how socialism destroyed his homeland, advocating for its freedom and stopping this ideology from ever being implemented in America and elsewhere. Daniel has appeared dozens of times in national TV channels such as Fox News and CNN, written for the USA Today, National Review, and other news outlets, and speaks regularly at college campuses, high schools, and events all over the country. In 2022, Di Martino founded the Dissident Project, the only speakers bureau in the nation that sends young immigrants to high schools at no cost to teach students about the evils of the socialist regimes they fled. Di Martino is also a graduate fellow at the Manhattan Institute, where he focuses on high-skill immigration policy, and the Freedom and Opportunity Fellow at the Job Creators Network, advancing free market economics and reaching out to the Hispanic community. Let's give him a warm round of applause as we welcome him to the stage.
Did anybody go to the grocery store last week? Yeah? I imagine that when you went to the grocery store, you found everything you wanted to buy. Maybe you bought meat, eggs, milk, maybe you wanted chicken, maybe you wanted some candy, some chocolate. I love chocolate, for example. And you went, you bought it, you picked it up in your cart, you paid for it, and you left, and it was a pretty seamless trip. The last time I went to a grocery store in Venezuela 6 years ago, it was a very different experience. It looked pretty much like this, an empty aisle in every single part of the grocery store. If you go to Walmart, imagine that there would be just nothing available. And so a few things that were available, people would just fight for them, go to the cashier, and then sometimes the cashier would tell you that you're not allowed to buy it because it's not your day of the week that you're allowed to buy things in the grocery store. The rationing was so severe that the government would assign you, based on the equivalent of your social security number, a day of the week you can go to the grocery store to buy things. Because my national ID number ended in number 1, I could only go Mondays and Saturdays. So today would have been my day. And the situation was again so bad that, for example, I would be in school like you guys in high school, and some teachers would have friends who would be cashiers at the grocery store. And the cashier would call their friend who was a teacher in my school. They would interrupt class pickup and say that there's chicken in the supermarket. And so the teacher would dismiss class and go to line up for the chicken that just arrived. And the students, of course, would be left without the class, but the teacher had to do whatever it was necessary to feed their family, of course. And the question that people ask me is, how does a country go to that? You know, was Venezuela always this way? And it was not. But that was not the only thing. Not only did we have to line up for food, not only did we have to fight for what we wanted, we couldn't even pay for what was available. We had what people call now hyperinflation. And so this is a picture of me buying a movie ticket to go to the cinema, and that is the price of a movie ticket in cash. You couldn't even fit that in your pocket. Imagine that you had to bring $100 bills to buy what you needed. That's what I had to do in Caracas. People, when they would go to withdraw cash from the ATM in a bank, they would bring a backpack and fill it up. Everybody was a millionaire, as you can imagine, but the money was worthless. And so how does the country, Venezuela, with the largest oil reserves on the planet, have to line up for gasoline at the gas stations? That's what we did. Some people had to line up for days. They would park and sleep in the car. And because Venezuela was also a dangerous country, people would come and rob you while you were waiting for that. Sometimes they would take the car, and sometimes they would kill you. And that was the huge risk. This is a picture of a line for gasoline in Caracas, by the way. And as a consequence of this incredible misery that Venezuela is going through, millions of people, like myself, have fled. This is a picture of the border between Colombia and Venezuela. And all those people are not Colombians, they're Venezuelans, and they're going in one direction, and that is out of the country. 7 million people out of 30, over 20% of the population, the equivalent of the whole west coast of the United States leaving the country, have left Venezuela in the last 7 years. That includes me, that includes my family. I left in 2016 after I got a scholarship to study in Indiana. And my parents left 2 years later, and now they live in Spain. And the reason I'm telling you this is because Venezuela didn't used to be this way. Venezuela was not a poor country before. In fact, Venezuela was the 4th richest country on the planet just in 1950, and still the richest in Latin America by the end of the 20th century when I was born in 1999. This is a picture of the Veracruz vessel, which is the ship that brought my grandfather, Vicente, from Spain in 1956 to Venezuela. Spain was a country that was devastated by the Spanish Civil War. The rest of Europe was destroyed by World War II later. And so it was a really poor place. And they had a fascist dictatorship that also made the population really oppressed and poor. And so my grandfather's father, he died in the Civil War. He was an orphan. And so my grandfather set for Venezuela when he was 19 years old. He hadn't finished high school. And he built a life there. And that's what millions of people did. Because in 1956, not only was Venezuela the 4th richest country in the world, but in many cases, it was actually richer than the United States. Let me give you a great example. I was checking in my bookstore in Colombia for books about Venezuela, and I found this book about the economy of Venezuela in the 1950s. And it showed that in that time, there were more cars per capita in Caracas than in New York City. More cars in Caracas than in New York City. That's a real way to measure prosperity, right? That more people, as a share of the population, were able to buy a car there than in New York. And so my grandfather opened a car garage where he washed cars, and he parked them and charged for that. He's the one on the right with his 2 clients and in the left and center. And he was able to not only have a living for himself, but save half of his income to send in remittances to his siblings and his mother in Spain. Imagine somebody without a college degree or even without a high school degree in the United States saving half of their income today. I don't know anybody who's able to do that even in this country today. That's unthinkable, right? My other grandfather, Lorenzo, he immigrated from Italy the same year, and he started making shoes by hand, how they used to be made back then. And then he was able to buy his own shoe store, where he sold shoes. That's what we call the American dream in Venezuela, where people from anywhere around the world could come, start a life, have a family, send their kids to college like they did to my parents, like people do here in the United States, and have cars, have a home, buy food, have a normal life. And so that's how I grew up. I'm in the picture in the right with my parents as a kid. And I went to school every day, my school started at 7 a.m., which is much earlier than you guys, so I'm jealous. And, the things started to change as I grew up, right? My favorite yogurt disappeared from the shelves. Then we went a week or 2 without milk in my home because my mom couldn't find milk in any place. Then, because we started making so much less money, going from $3,000 to $4,000 a month when I was a kid to making just $100 a month when I was in high school. Imagine living with $100 a month, guys, your whole family. you wouldn't be able to live, right? You would have to consume your savings until you run out of them, and then it would happen to you what happened to most Venezuelans. They would start eating from the trash. I've seen people fighting with knives for trash to eat from. I've seen moms find food for their kids next to them. These are not crazy homeless people who have, some kind of mental illness. This is a regular person who's just starving and going through the trash to try to get money for their kids, and get food for their kids. And I didn't want that future for myself. I didn't want that future for my family. And so that's why I decided to leave Venezuela, and that's why my family left after. This is one of the last pictures we took. And I left in 2016, which was a really sad decision, but the right decision for me, and the right decision for 7 million other people. Now, why am I telling you these things? Yes, it's a sad situation, and it's interesting, world history-wise, that this is happening in our part of the world. But why does this matter for you in the United States? It matters because Venezuela is the only country in history who has been destroyed by socialism after first electing it democratically. Venezuela did not go through a violent revolution that put a dictator in power. Venezuela did not have a military coup that put these people in power. They tried, but they failed. Venezuela did not have some sort of war or conquest by another power or country. Venezuelans themselves elected these people who destroyed our nation. And that's why it's important for America, because if America were to ever lose its prosperity and its freedom, it wouldn't be through some military coup. It would be through the people electing their own demise. And so the policies that caused this disaster in Venezuela, go back. The policies that caused this disaster in Venezuela were three. And this is why when I talk about Venezuela, I say it's a socialist nation, because the policies they implemented are what Karl Marx really prescribed. Nationalizations of businesses. What is a nationalization? It's the government coming over and saying, your business is not yours anymore. Now we own your business. And the president of the country would literally walk the streets, point to your store and say, expropiese, which means expropriated, eminent domain. You lose your property over your business. They would go on TV and do whatever they wanted. And there would be no judge who could stop them. Parliament was all taken over by them. And this is what people initially voted for. And so they started taking over companies, and of course, that destroyed every company they took over. Why? Because think of it for yourself. When you have anybody here has sold things or have their own business trying to sell things online or here in school? Has anybody? You guys have? Well, what's your goal when you have a business? You want to make the most money possible. And how do you make the most money possible? You reduce costs and increase revenue. How do you do that? Well, you reduce costs by innovating ways to make things more efficient and faster and produce more. You increase revenue by trying to increase sales, using more things. And that is what grows your economy. But when the government owns a business, their goal is not to maximize profit. Their goal is to maximize votes. How do they maximize votes? They lower the price below cost, so they start losing money. They hire more people than they need, so that they can make those workers happy and they vote for them and they're dependent on the government. And that's exactly what happened to each and every single government taken over enterprise in Venezuela. I saw fields of sugarcane that were taken over by the Venezuelan regime go from being planted to being deserts in the middle of a tropical country. I saw the government make stupid decisions, like put in a greenhouse in the middle of a tropical country. And that's what happened when the government took over our things. The second was that the businesses that were not taken over, the government would come and tell you how much you could charge for your goods and services. If you had a farm and you produced coffee beans, the government would tell you how much you could charge for your coffee beans. If you had a grocery store and you sold, say, flour, the government would tell you how much you could charge for flour. Now that sounds innocuous, but the consequence is that if it costs $1 to produce something, say, a pound of coffee beans, let's say that for the farmer it costs $1, and the government tells them that they can only sell it for $1, why would they produce any coffee beans at all if they can't make money? So they stopped producing, and that's why we had shortages, and that's why I had to line up for food, and that's why people went to starve. Starvations are not produced by a natural disaster. They're produced by government policy. That's what happened in Venezuela. That's what happened in the Soviet Union. That's what happened in China. And so the government, to initially get elected, what they promised was, we're going to give everybody free housing, free healthcare, free education, free utilities. And in most of those things, they actually delivered. I almost didn't have to pay anything at all for electricity, about $1 a month, the equivalent for you guys. Water the same. Anybody who the government wanted to give, they built like 1 million new public housing units in a country of 30 million people, so that's a lot. They created a bunch of new universities where people could get free degrees. That became worthless degrees, but they created them. And a lot of new hospitals that were for free. But the question was, where did that money come from? How did they build these things? Who paid the workers that built these things? Who paid the teachers? Who paid the nurses? Who paid the developers who built these buildings? In addition to all the corruption that happened in these deals, the money came from the government printing. So they took the central bank, equivalent of our Federal Reserve, and they started printing money. The more they printed, the more inflation went up, and the more they wanted to help the poor, the more life got more expensive, and the more we lost our purchasing power. And that's why I went from making $3,000 to $4,000 a month to making $100. Not because we were making less money. It's because our money devalued, prices went up so fast, and that's why I couldn't fit enough cash in my pocket. That's why when I was a kid, I couldn't buy things, because the government spent so much money that it made it unaffordable for all of us to do the same. And so, the consequence of this policy was that Venezuela became a less economically free country. When we think of socialism, it's not really a black or white switch. It's a gradual scale. From the most government-controlled economy in the world, in North Korea, where nobody can do absolutely anything without government approval, to maybe anarchy or like no government at all intervention. Venezuela went in 1970 from being the 10th freest economy in the planet, according to the Fraser Institute, to being the second to last in the ranking, because there were only 166 countries ranked. So Venezuela is a great natural experiment for whether socialism works, because it went from being one of the freest to one of the least free economies in the planet. And the consequence was this misery that we see today. Now, today, a lot of people try to blame the crisis in my home country on other things other than the government's policies. My favorite is that they blame the oil industry. They blame that Venezuela is an oil-dependent country, and therefore, if the oil price goes down, then of course, that things are going to go south. To which I ask, has anybody seen anybody starve in Dubai? The tallest building in the world, Dubai. Has anybody heard about Dubai, the United Arab Emirates? Very rich country, right? Saudi Arabia. These are not only oil-dependent countries, these are deserts in the middle of nowhere where you can't plant food. Venezuela is a tropical country where you can plant anything you want. Mangoes grow in the streets. People that were starving, actually, many of them got saved because they were able to eat mangoes from the street. So it's not the oil industry. The other big excuse is corruption. They say, well, of course, this is just, Daniel, you're exaggerating. It's not the policies, it's that just the people who are in power are doing it wrong. They're stealing money. If you had a good socialist, everything would work out fine. But that's not the case either, because there are plenty of corrupt countries that don't have the situation that we have. For all we care about, most of Latin America is under very corrupt governments. Do you think that Saudi Arabia is not a corrupt government? They just legalized corruption because everything's ruled by the royal family. Iran is not a corrupt country. Iran is a theocratic regime that takes away women's rights, that takes away your right to do anything you want, that you can't buy alcohol, you can't do normal things that are okay in the United States. Those are corrupt countries too. Then why aren't people fleeing those countries like they are Venezuela? Iran is a country so sanctioned by the US government, for the people who argue that it's the US fault that Venezuela is in this crisis, because I've heard that. They even blame, Obama, they blame Trump, they blame Biden, they blame everybody you want. I've even heard, my favorite, is when the Venezuelan regime blamed US Senator Marco Rubio for a blackout in Venezuela, saying that they hacked them and that they eliminated electricity for 30 million people. Or when they blame an iguana for when we have a blackout, saying that an iguana ate the cable. Like an iguana is like a big lizard. They have seriously done these things. The president would be speaking in a national address, and even the president would lose power in the middle of the address, even in his own presidential palace. That's how incompetent they are. And so it is not sanctions, because Iran is a country so sanctioned that you can't even send a piece of US mail. In Venezuela, if you and I want it today, we can get a bag of food, send it through FedEx, and go through a company in Texas or in Florida and send it home to home in Caracas to feed your family and help your friends. And that's what a lot of Venezuelan immigrants in America are doing to help their families inside Venezuela. So Venezuela is not in a bad situation because of sanctions. Venezuela is not in a bad situation because it's dependent on oil or because it is a corrupt country. The difference between Venezuela and countries like Iran is that in Venezuela, they don't respect your private property. In Iran, they do. For all their faults in other areas, Iran is not a socialist country. Venezuela is a socialist country. And that's why in Venezuela, 7 million people have fled. Now the question is, Daniel, why does this matter to me? Right? You've already told me, yes, of course, Venezuela is a story that could happen in America because it was a democratic country, but that's never going to happen in the United States. Nobody wants to become like Venezuela. And the reality is that some people do want to become like Venezuela. And even worse, some people want to turn us into Venezuela, but they tell you that they don't. They're lying, even though their proposals are the same. And so let me show you some examples of this. This is an op-ed, an article, published in the Salon magazine, a very popular left-wing magazine, in 2013, titled Hugo Chavez's Economic Miracle. This is from 2013. Inflation was over 50%. There were shortages of food everywhere. I was a 14-year-old kid. I remember this very clearly. Do you guys think that 50% inflation is an economic miracle? Maybe an economic hell. Maybe a miracle of how bad it is. But no. This is what this man was arguing. And you say, well, Daniel, this is just a crazy guy who's writing an article for our magazine. No, this man is called David Sirota, and he was the main political advisor of US Senator Bernie Sanders in the 2020 presidential campaign. And he's not alone. There are organized groups in this country, like the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, who are, by the way, hundreds of thousands of members, who pay dues and who regularly push for the same policies of Venezuela. How do I know this? Well, these are people who claim they want to turn us into the Nordic countries, into some paradise like Denmark or Sweden or Norway. Yet, I've never seen them meet with the Prime Minister of Denmark or Sweden or Norway. Yet, I do have pictures of them meeting with the dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, who they themselves publish online, by the way. This is no secret. They're very proud of what they do. These are American citizens meeting with a dictator, a murderer of another country, the country I fled, and who claim that want to implement their policies here. Should I not be concerned about those things? I think I should. I think you should too. Because many of these people end up in Congress. Many of these people end up in state governments. And ultimately, their goal is to build a bench of politicians large enough to eventually become president. Because they know that they're not going to gain power violently in America. Just like they knew they wouldn't be able to gain power violently in Venezuela. And they did it through the democratic process. And so, when somebody tells you that they want America to be like any of these other European countries. I was just in the geography class and we were talking about European countries and we were learning. I don't know, where's the class that I was at just now? Raise your hands, guys. I don't see you. Over there, yeah. So we were just learning about these countries. So there's a lot of politicians who claim that they want to turn us into Denmark, Sweden, or Norway. And so let's think about, what do these countries do right? What do these countries actually do versus what are we being proposed in America? Well, let's start by the first thing. Businesses pay lower taxes in all those countries than in the United States. That's right. In these supposedly socialist countries, corporations pay lower corporate tax than in America. Sounds like we're the socialists. Yet, the people who want to turn us into a socialist country want to increase taxes on corporations, which is the opposite of what these nations do. Maybe they're right. We should be like Denmark. Let's lower taxes on corporations. While corporations pay lower taxes, the average worker pays a much higher tax rate in all these countries. How do I know this? Well, this is the tax foundation, and the data comes from the World Bank. But the difference is that these countries not only have the income taxes, payroll taxes that we have, they also have over 20% sales taxes. So everything you buy has a 20% tax on it. Not 7, not 6. Everybody pays income and payroll taxes. There's no, half of the population in America doesn't pay income taxes. That's not the case in these countries. And so they finance all these generous government programs by taking the money first from the same people that they're going to give the programs to. So they're not distributing money from the rich to the poor. They're taking away your money and giving it back to yourself, to you. Now, you can support or oppose these policies. Maybe we should have higher taxes to pay for new government programs. That's a totally fine political position to have. But you actually need to understand that the taxes, the amount of revenue you need, will need to come from lower income people. There's just not enough money at the top. And the countries that have the lowest taxes in Europe are actually the Nordic countries. The countries with high taxes in Europe are Germany, are France, are Italy, and Austria. It's not these supposedly socialist paradises. And of course, my favorite one is the deficit, is the debt. These countries run balanced budgets. I've never heard a socialist in the United States ever tell me that we need to balance the budget in the United States. I hear the opposite. We need more spending. We need to get in debt to finance all these generous programs for the poor. And these countries do have generous programs for the poor, not just the poor, for everyone. But they pay for it, and they pay for it by increasing taxes on you, not on the rich, but on everyone. Now, you can support those policies. Maybe you should do that. Maybe you should, push for those things in government. But that's what those countries do. They don't take from the rich to give to the poor these massive amounts of money, because those massive amounts of money don't exist. Yet, the people who want to turn us into a country with a much larger government also want to make it much harder to start a business, increase red tape, regulation. When the fact is that today, it's much harder to start a business in America than it is in most of Nordic Europe. This is the index of how easy it is to start a business, according to the World Bank. And America is on 55th place. 55th. It's like an average country anymore. It's not even one of the top countries for how easy it is to start a business. Norway is on 25th place, 30 places above us. I think that it's true. Maybe these people are right. We should be like Nordic countries. We should lower corporate taxes. We should make it easy to start a business. We should give school choice. We should balance the budget. But none of that sounds like the platform of the socialists in the United States. It sounds like pretty much a conservative platform, actually. And to drive home the point that it is the policies, not the people in power, that determine the success of your economy and how prosperous people are, is what's happened in Venezuela in the last 2 years. I told you about how I had to line up for food, how people were fighting for things in the grocery stores, how there was hyperinflation. These things have totally changed in the last 2 years in Venezuela. There are no more shortages. Now you can find anything you want in the grocery store since last year. Why? Because the government eliminated all the price controls. Now the government is not telling you how much you can charge for things. It's the same bad people in power who are even involved with narco trafficking, terrorism. These are evil folks. But now they're not controlling your ability to sell and trade. And the consequence is that the economy has fixed itself in many respects. Now most people are even using US dollars, not even our currency, to trade. It is working because it's not about who is in power, it's not about the politician you elect, it's about the policy they pass. And so I began telling you guys about my story of how things were destroyed during my life, about how, for example, we lost power every week. We would have a blackout in my home every week. Sometimes we would have no water for several weeks, sometimes over a month. And my dad, who was the president of our homeowners association, he would have to set a rationing schedule in a whiteboard at the entrance of the neighborhood, telling residents that the water would only be on from this hour to this hour because we had to ration it and collect it from the rain. Imagine going from the life that you're living to having to collect water from the rain and light for food. That's what happened in Venezuela. And so that changed my perspective, right? Because you stop taking things for granted. And the problem that we have in the United States, the problem that we have, is that a lot of people take things for granted. And because they take things for granted, they think it's normal to find things in the grocery store. They think it's normal to have electricity. They think it's normal to have water. They think it's normal to feel safe while you walk down the street. But those things are not guaranteed. And those things can go away much faster than we earn them. And so what I invite you to do next time you go to the grocery store, next time with your parents, next time you turn on a light, next time your family celebrates your birthday, next time you do whatever, that you think about all the amazing things that we have around us and we just don't notice them anymore. Because if we stop taking things for granted, we will stop taking our freedom for granted. And maybe, just maybe, we will keep America a free country and a great place to live. Thank you. Thank you. You want me to ask for the questions, or you're going to say?
So, Daniel has agreed to stick around and answer some of the questions that you have. We have 2 microphones set up right here in the front. And so if any student wants to come forward and ask questions of Daniel, they can do that. So just walk yourself up. Mrs. Hollinger will be here on this one, and then I'll be over here on this one helping you. So here you go.
Yeah, just make a line if you guys want to. Put it closer.
My name is Brady Kress. It's nice to meet you. So if the gas lines were so long to get gas for your car, then why didn't people sell their cars to get money that they needed and walk these places?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of people stopped having cars. What's happening in Caracas now, it's kind of like what happened in Cuba, right? Where all the cars are stuck in the 1950s in Cuba. All the cars in Venezuela are going to be stuck in the 2000s. So we're still better off than the Cubans because we've had the socialism for less time. We also got lucky that these people came into power already in the age of the internet. So Venezuelans have access to the internet, have access to information, know what's going on, communicate through, online applications, which is something Cubans don't have the luck of being able to do. Why don't people sell their cars? I mean, a lot of people, if you had a second car, of course you sold it. But sometimes you just need your car to go somewhere, and to go to work. Some people need, there's no good public transportation in Venezuela. A lot of people started going through buses. Like, we have something called camioneticas, where it's like private busing system, and people charge to let you in their car. And it's just become very unsafe. Not only unsafe, the government for many years also regulated the price of the camioneticas, and so they stopped giving you rides because they couldn't profit. Yeah, I guess that's why. But yeah, there's definitely fewer cars in the streets, but more so because people just left the country, right? So 7 million people leave, of course there's going to be less traffic.
In contrast to Venezuela, I actually really have to question when it comes to the Nordic countries that I wonder if the situation in the Nordic country is actually vastly different living-wise from the Venezuelan countries. Is it like a more stable living life than the obvious nightmare that is Venezuela?
Well, of course, because those countries aren't socialist, right? They're normal countries where people have private property, where, in fact, businesses pay lower taxes than here. There's so many famous companies that you might know of that you just don't know they're from those countries. Like Lego is Danish, IKEA is Swedish, Nokia was Swedish. Like so many companies that this country has created because they created good business environments. And yeah, those are great places to live by any metric. America is also a great place to live. It's a different type of system. Maybe we need to, learn some things from those countries. My concern is people who are using those countries as excuses to implement the policies of Venezuela. I don't mind if somebody wants to actually be like the Nordic countries. I think that that's a good discussion to have.
Hi, my name is Oliver, and how did Venezuela lower the inflation?
Good question. They lowered it. It's still really high, okay? Like when I mean lowered it, it's like it went down from like 1,000,000% to 100%, which is still higher than the US has ever had. But in part because a lot of people just stopped using the currency. Half of the population stopped using the Venezuelan bolivar, and now they're using US dollars. And then in part because the central bank decided that we're gonna be more independent. And so they started raising interest rates, they started restricting lending in the economy. It's a trade-off. The government hasn't stopped spending, and that's the problem. And that's the problem here too. Why do we have nearly 10% inflation in America? Because the government started overspending too much. And economists on every part of the ideological spectrum know this. So we need to be careful not to follow that path.
Hi, I'm Amelie, and I was wondering how old were you when you started to be affected by this?
Ever since I was conscious, things started to get worse. Like I said, when I was a kid, like with the milk. So it just got gradually worse every year. And you can see that in the data too, like inflation, was 30, then 50, then 100%, then 500%, then 1,000,000%. And those are hard numbers to grasp. So in the peak, when I mean high inflation, I mean like something costs $1 today, next Monday, $2, next Monday, $4, next Monday, $8, and so on, doubling every week. Yeah, so that ever since I'm conscious. Oh, this way.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. So my question is, was the problem with socialism just the fact that the government controlled most of the businesses there?
Yeah, the problem is that when the government makes decisions that should be individual decisions, this is what we call in the economy the information problem, the knowledge problem of socialism. The government doesn't know everything we know individually, right? And the price of something reflects what we would call its relative scarcity. So if something, if there's a drought that makes it, much more difficult to produce food, the price of food is going to go up. And if you don't allow it to go up, then there will be less production, and there will be a shortage. And the government just doesn't have this information, and only people independently, freely can have that. And so the problem with socialism is the government making decisions for us that should be made by you and I. Yeah.
Hi, my name is so Venezuela's still like inflation.
Yeah, there's still some inflation, just much lower. And if you don't use the Venezuelan currency, you use US dollars, then you have no problem. And that's the case for a lot of people because they receive remittances from their families here in Colombia, in Peru, in Spain, in other countries, and they're basically immune from the inflation. Now, that doesn't mean that their life is better. That just means that their life is stable, right? They stop losing purchasing power, but they don't gain it.
Hi, I'm Christian. So if you guys are struggling to get food and electricity, how did 7 million people have like the money or like resources to escape from Venezuela, like on plane and
Yeah.
did you have to like, did people help you from other organizations? Did you like have to house airplane and all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, remember, we were a rich country. My family had enough money to pay for a flight ticket. Not everybody does, but a lot of people did, and that's how a lot of people fled. Now, because the situation has turned so poor, and now most people don't actually have the money to pay for a flight ticket, people are walking. There's a great documentary by Nat Geo, by a Venezuelan comedian. Imagine like this comedian following refugees, walking thousands of miles from Venezuela all the way to Chile, which is longer than walking from here to like northern Canada. Like it's a huge distance, very dangerous track, and he tries to make them happier in the way, but also hear their stories. It's called The Walkers, Los Caminantes in Nat Geo. I highly recommend it. And so a lot of people are just walking, which is really, really scary. Yeah.
Thank you, students, for listening to the questions and the answers.
Hi, my name is Lahana, and the way you described socialism at that point sounded a lot like communism. So in Venezuela at that time, what would be the difference between the two?
Great question. So let me go about dismissing a myth. A lot of people think that when it's like really bad, it's communism, and when it's like just the government doing things for us, that's socialism, whatever the government does. And that's not the case. According to Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, socialism is the stage before communism. And there's actually been no communist nation by definition. The USSR was a socialist nation. That's why it's called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And that is because socialism is when the government takes over the means of production. Communism is when, according to Marx, the people are changed and there's a new type of man who will share everything voluntarily with everybody else, even though he doesn't know them. And there's no need for the government to redistribute things. That, of course, has never been achieved and will never be achieved because you are not going to give half of your income to strangers instead of your own family, right? And so, regardless of how they work or whatever. And so that is what socialism is. Now, socialism is not whatever the government does. Socialism is government takeover of businesses, it's government intrusion in private property, it's not building roads, it's not having a court system or a military or even, having the government help the poor and redistribute some income to stop extreme poverty. That's a different thing. That's having some form of welfare. What we have to be careful of are the proposals to finance that welfare realistic? Or are we going to cause inflation? Or are we going to cause shortages? It's all trade-offs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I just wanted to ask how you were able to come to the United States, or how the process was, and establish yourself as you are today.
Thank you. Well, I knew I wanted to leave Venezuela because I had no future there, and so I applied to colleges. I was looking for universities that would give me a Fulbright scholarship, and my dad got a Facebook ad by university in Indiana, IUPUI. I don't know if anybody here is from the Midwest, in Indianapolis. He told me to apply. I was your age, and I was like, Dad, come on, you're just being targeted by like Facebook because you're searching for stuff. I'm not gonna look at this university, stop bothering me. He pushed me too much, and so I did it, I looked it up, and there was a scholarship they gave to one international student per year that was a full ride. I applied, I got an interview, and I got it. And that's how I came to the US. I graduated in December 2019 with a bachelor's in economics, moved to Kentucky in January for a job at the University of Kentucky, and then the pandemic happened, so I switched to online working. And then I got admitted into the PhD in economics at Columbia in New York, but because everything was online, I stayed one extra year in Kentucky, and then I moved to New York City last year, and that's where I'm at. And regarding like speaking and things like that, since I saw there was a need for the voice of people like me, in this country. I wrote some articles for some news outlets that I pitched. And some of those articles became very widely read, and then they called me for like interviews, the news outlets themselves for TV. And how it works with TV is that once you do it, if you don't do it really badly, they're gonna call you again eventually, and then you're gonna learn with experience, and then you build relationships, and then from those relationships you keep, appearing in media and things like that.
Hi, I'm Mila, and so I thought it might be a little dangerous if the teachers leave at one point in school and all the children have to leave as well. So will the kids just come home and the parents will just be like, oh, there's the kid.
Yeah, when the teachers would leave in class because of the food shortages, there would be other staff in schools. But most of the time they would be left alone. Yeah, and most kids would just tell their parents, and they would be picked up. Sometimes we would have big, would have a big brain drain, right? Because if you had all these professionals who were high school teachers who would have better opportunities leaving the country, everybody would leave the country, and so I didn't have like sometimes a biology teacher for the full semester, and just didn't get taught the subject. And so, you got dismissed earlier from class, and your parents would come pick you up, and that's it. Yeah.
I have another question. So why is there supposed to be different days of the week where you're supposed to buy food and stuff?
That's a great question. There shouldn't be. You should be able to go whenever you want. And there were different days because there was not enough food. The government wanted to ration the food such that as many people could get as little as possible. And the way that they chose to ration it was to limit which days of the week you could go to the grocery store. But it's true, that's not a normal thing. In a free country without the government getting involved in the food industry, you have no problems in the United States, right? And people don't actually starve in this country. And so there's no problem with profiting from food. Here we profit plenty from food, yet people have very accessible, meals. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sydney, and I'm just wondering how do people lie about becoming socialists to the government?
Are you meaning like do people have to lie in Venezuela about becoming socialist?
How do people here lie to become socialists?
Yeah, like the politicians. Well, in many ways. First, they claim to be socialists themselves, so that's already one big red flag, right? And then the second is, they propose the same things that Venezuela did, giving everything away for free, that, the government can even, I've heard even politicians here claim that we can actually print money to pay for our own things. The demonization of profit is a great example. Many people think that inequality is a bad thing. And inequality is not inherently good or bad, right? First, we're not equal. Everybody's different from each other, and that's a beautiful thing. That's why we are all unique human beings, genetically different, and that's where all, for me as a Catholic, made in the image of God, and all uniquely. And we have different preferences. Everybody wants to do a different type of job. And so a lot of politicians think that inequality is unfair, that it's not okay that somebody makes more money than you, that if somebody makes more money, they should take it from them and give it to you. I don't think that that's right. I think that if somebody, with their effort and their abilities, natural abilities, they can make a lot of money by doing something that's honest, they're not cheating anyone, then that's a good form of inequality because they're contributing to us, they're making us more prosperous too. Like say Bill Gates with the computer, right? We're all better off because we have computers. And we chose to buy those computers and we gave away our money voluntarily. That's an honest work.
Thank you. And why did your family and you leave early, Venezuela?
Great question. I asked my parents that question too. That's what I told them. They should have left earlier. A lot of people don't want to, leaving your country is a difficult decision. start that, right? It's not easy. It uproots you. You don't know anybody elsewhere. You are scared of what may come. Many people, my parents were never supporters of the Venezuelan regime, but they never thought it would get this bad, right? In fact, they left only because I really harassed them to leave. I called them like, so what are you doing? When are you going to sell the home? When are you going to sell the car? What are you doing? You need to leave. You're not going to see me again. And I did that until they left 2 years later to go to Spain. And so a lot of people, I still have my aunt in Venezuela, and we tell her to leave. Honestly, I don't know why she stays. I agree. I think that the smarter people are the ones who left earlier. I'm going to say that. Every time I meet a Venezuelan, I ask them, when did you leave? And some of them say, 20 years ago. Oh, you were one of the smart ones. So that's a great question, but I'm not sure the answer.
Hi, my name is Annie. My question is, how long do you think it'll take for Venezuela to get back to its original prosperity?
I think that, if we were to overthrow the Maduro regime and impose, free market principles in Venezuela today, it would take several years. But it would be quicker than people expect, I think. Many countries have done that transition. Poland did it, the Baltic countries did it, the Czech Republic, most of Eastern Europe really, even China in the 1970s and 80s liberalized its economy and grew a lot. So I think it's sooner than people expect, but maybe it could take a decade, maybe less. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Steve. My question is, what's the point of working when you don't get paid?
Exactly, that's the thing that happens in socialist countries. And so, that happened to a lot of, especially farmers and a lot of teachers. There were physicians in Venezuela who were making less money than garbage collectors. I saw how the minister of one of the ministries that the government created, they created so many that I forget. My favorite government agency that they created to hire people to get their votes was the Vice Ministry for Supreme Social Happiness. That was the name. It's like 1984, the book, which I highly recommend you read. So, a lot of people just didn't get paid well, so they stopped working. And that's exactly the principle. If there's economics is about incentives. And if you don't have an incentive to work, then you won't work. And if you have an incentive to work, then you will work.
I was wondering, as a young boy in Venezuela, how did he cope with everything going on? Yeah, mentally.
Yeah. I had a good family. I'm an only child. I had amazing grandparents, amazing parents, amazing uncles and aunts, cousins, and honestly, I was very happy because I had a good family. And obviously, I hated going to the grocery store. I hated anything that related to buying and selling things, but you learn to live with it. Most people learn to live with it, and that's how we do. Yeah, it's sad because I see my little cousins who are, one of my cousins is probably your age, and he really wants to leave, but his mom doesn't, and so it's a big issue. Because they've seen how you could live, right? Venezuela is different from like Cuba or the Soviet Union was in its day, because Venezuelans still remember how things used to be. And so it's very different to always live in extreme poverty than to have been in the middle class and then become extreme poor, because you know that things are not like they used to be. And so that's harder for kids. Having their parents tell them, no, we can't actually do this, because we just don't have the money to. And I'm not talking about buying an ice cream, I'm talking about normal things. That's I don't know what to tell you, except that I just got used to it.
So I was wondering, was it like a lie? Would it be like if you sold a car, could you buy a movie ticket?
If I sold what?
So like if you sold a car, it's like
Oh, okay. No, of course a car is worth more than the movie ticket. Inflation just went up on everything, and so the only thing that really depreciated was our wages. Everything went up in price. And of course, a car was much more expensive than a movie ticket. The problem is most people don't have cars now. But yeah, like some things maintain their value in dollars. Like a lot of people started saving in tuna cans, if you could find them, because that would maintain its purchasing power, and it's easily to trade, and it doesn't usually go bad. So yeah, we saved in tuna cans. Car tires, which were hard to find. People would accumulate car tires to sell later. My favorite story, and this will be it, is, my mom, to make more money, she had to contraband chocolate. Chocolate was controlled by the government. Okay, well, I'll leave it here.
Please stay seated for just 1 second.
Yeah, I'll leave it here. But, this is what the government did to us, and it was a pleasure to speak to you guys. Thank you so much for the chance. I would love to... Thank you.
Before we leave, we wanted to give him an opportunity. We're going to take a selfie with himself with all the students behind. So, Daniel, if you don't mind coming down right here in the front, or where you're at right there would be great. Stand up and give him a round of applause while he takes a selfie.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.